Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at the first submission by Linda of her horse Lucky Lady. Lucky Lady is a 6-year-old that she's had for a while, but a little time getting her started here, as the horse evidently is one of those ones that's prone to damaging itself. So she's gone through a lot of that kind of downtime with this horse because of that. But she looks like she's coming along really nicely now. Would like to point out to you guys the boots that you see her wearing. People ask me all the time, what do we use? That's exactly what we use, is just these fleece-lined, simple boots like this. Remember, there are no boots that really support the horse's tendons, as some of them would like you to believe, nor would you want them to heat up the horse's leg too much, as many of these neoprene type of boots do and this sort of stuff. So this is just what we use on our horses, just so you know. As I said, people ask us quite often. But this all looks really good starting out here. We can see this horse is a little straight behind, and that's why, once again, like Legolas, like many of the horses that we see, the only way to get a horse like this moving optimally, or any other horse moving optimally, that is to get them over their backs. But ones like this, it makes a huge difference when horses are a little straight behind. The difference between stretching that neck out and really pulling those withers up and really being able to swing and flex their hocks is huge. And the good thing about it for most of you is that it's very noticeable. So, a lot of people today are very fooled by these $1,000,000 horses that just have this incredible movement that no one's ever seen before. But the problem is they're not really connected, which is why they all burn out at such a young age. So you're doing a really good job getting this horse working towards where it should be. All this walk work is quite good. We're always asking to try to get a little bit longer. So once you get the big stretch like that, you want to keep asking for that little bit more activity. But this one, you can clearly see the difference when this horse does not stretch, how that hind leg just really straightens out and really looks like it's stuck in mud. So here in this position, the horse is taking pretty nice big active steps. But it can continue to open up and swing even a little more as you go. So really good work right there. That's lovely. You can see the other horse begins to pick up its legs and actually flex the horse and flex its hocks rather, and set the leg back down on the ground rather than just drag the leg forward. And these kind of horses, that are a little straight behind, are notorious for that. And the only way to really get them looking like anything at all is to do just what you're doing here. So great work. Now here, when the horse just gets a little upside down like that, remember to give them a little tap with the whip and try to get them in the habit of just coming forward from your leg, which is what we do all this for. So we're essentially teaching the horse how to respond to the legs, and then we get up there, it's not such a problem. The horse understands what it is that we want. And of course, that's the whole beauty of this system, is that we basically train the horse before we get on it, which saves a lot of wear and tear on riders. And of course, when we learn to keep a horse relaxed the way this one is now, that's a big part of your safety. So between getting a horse over its back and keeping it relaxed are probably the two things that keep you the safest in the world when it comes to being on the back of a horse. Remember that any horse that's not over its back is always prone to tripping, is always prone to even falling down, especially if riders ride with heavy hands where they hold backwards against the mouth of the horse. We're seeing so many riders today injured by just this thing. That is, they're holding against the horse, so something goes wrong. People get very complacent riding in rings all the time, which is what most people today do, unfortunately. So they don't get out and gallop cross country and this kind of stuff where they could really see the ramifications of what happens when you ride an upside down horse. I can't tell you how many times out in the hunt field, and once again, the reason I quit hunting was not because of any other reason, that I just got tired of watching people get mangled out in the hunt field who had no idea and whose skills were not nearly at a level to be able to ride cross country, folks. There's nothing more dangerous than fox hunting, for people who have never, really don't know how to ride, whose horses have never learned to work over their back, therefore they're not balanced on all four legs. So just remember that your safety is just so much an important part of this. I'm very happy to say that I've had very few injuries in my entire career, of my students, that is, or myself. But if anything, that to me is the most important thing, that I have put, people under my supervision have had very little, that is, injuries. And which is what we always want to look for. To me, to take somebody who, most people make the mistake of getting on young horses much too soon. And even the ones that are relaxed, they think, oh, this horse is relaxed, so now let's take it out and do something else with it. And of course, the first time they do, and a dog runs out at them, or a turkey comes out of the bushes or whatever the case may be, they find that they really have no control at all, and the horse just takes off, bolts, and bucks them off. Because the horse, had not been in training long enough to really get that training to sink in, if you will, and really be part of how the horse reacts to everything. So a young horse that somebody gets on, even if it's quite calm, it goes okay until they come to the next experience. And that sends them flying. So once again, that's why it's so important. It's just, to me, only a fool that gets on a horse that isn't at least somewhat trained to this point, where you know what's going to happen when you get on them to some degree. You've seen how they've reacted, and you've taught them how to respond to the bridle. Most importantly, of course, so you have some breaks. I say to people all the time, like, you wouldn't go and get a car with no brakes and go try to drive it. Well, that's what people do with young horses when they take them out too soon and put themselves in these kind of positions. So you're doing a great job here with this one, and hopefully those kind of difficulty problems will be overcome by doing just what you're doing here. This looks like a very sweet horse. It looks like one that should become a really good partner for you in time to come. So all that work in hand was very good. It got better as it went. And you can even see here how this horse is rather straight-legged behind, so it really has a hard time. But watch what happens as it stretches down, how much more flexion you get in the hocks. Once you get over this idea of that so many people have today, that the head and neck has something to do with whether the horse is, well, it does, but not in the way people think of it. Just because your horse's head and neck is up in the air does not mean it's not on the forehand. The more they are up in the air, the more on the forehand they are. And the more they lift their knees up, the more they are on the forehand. Like a Tennessee Walker or Saddlebred is always on the forehand. It's just lifting its knees up because it has no upwards thrust through the back of the gates. Which is, of course, why it makes those horses so comfortable for people, because they move totally flat-footed. There's no upwards thrust at all. That's why you hear those people always say, oh, it's just like sitting in an armchair. Well, as you may have heard me say before, if you want to sit in an armchair, why don't you just stay in your armchair? Why get on the back of a horse, right? So it's very important that riders always have to realize that they have to come up to the level of the horse, that is, and level of fitness themselves, to be able to control their body weight and balance on the back of a horse. That comes from your core strength, which you look like you have plenty of, so all good here. Really good in this walk, stretching down, like is really reaching into it now. That's very, very good. Could be a little more active, of course. We're always looking for that little more swing, but what you're getting here is enough. That is enough for the horse to improve. And actually, this is quite nice here. And look how he starts to swing a little more actively. You get a little more bounce even in the walk there. That's really good. I love how you have the correct bit on this horse. Looks like a simple French loose ring snaffle. I warn everybody here, once again, I've gone to so many clinics in the last year where people have showed up with these mylar bits in their horses' mouths. And I can tell you, folks, if you want to be a good rider, the worst thing you could have in the mouth of your horse is a mylar bit. They're actually designed for people who hang on the mouth of the horse, so it puts the pressure on the lips of the horse instead of on the bars of the horse, because the bad rider, the object, their point is, well, the person's pulling on the horse's mouth. Well, a person who pulls like that shouldn't have contact with the horse's mouth, period. Which is what they used to do in the old days. When people didn't know how to ride, that's what standing martingales were designed for. Like out in the hunt field, which is where they started for the most part. When they brought beginners out there, horses get excited and start throwing their heads back a little bit, and so that's why they started the whole standing martingale thing. I've never known any good rider that would even put one on. I wouldn't ride a horse. There's not enough money in the world to pay me to ride a horse in the standing martingale, because I know that if the horse trips, it's going to come down on top of me, which I've seen hundreds of times. I also saw one horse with a standing martingale get its young girl on its back, wasn't paying attention, letting the horse graze, and the horse got the standing martingale through its mouth and then flipped straight over backwards onto the girl on top of a brand new car. That was near the parking lot where the girl was. It just backed up and threw itself over backwards onto the car. Car still had the sticker in the window. Completely totaled the car. The whole roof completely caved in. The girl just barely escaped with her life. So we never want to tie a horse's heads down, and that means also with your hands. If you're pulling on the mouth of the horse at the time, you're basically tying its head down with your hands. Which, once again, a horse, to regulate its balance, must be able to move its head up and down. If a horse starts to fall, it needs to be able to bring its head up to lift those shoulders off the ground. Just some things to think about this morning. Now, this trot is looking really good. Could have a little more swing in it, just like the walk, but it's developing really nice. And you can see how there, as the horse just loses all energy, how the back end just kind of falls out. And maybe that was you just asking for a downwards transition there. And that's just the way to do that, though. You can see how the horse kind of slowed down and stiffened a little bit into that transition. That's very normal at this stage, and we just ignore that. That will go away all by itself if you continue working the horse correctly. Unfortunately, in today's world, people get all hung up on making everything perfect. I just watched a video by a young girl who's well known, who's done very well in the last few years, and she did very well on a horse a few years back, and then we saw the horse just completely fall apart, and then we see her, and so I watched this girl giving an exhibition of what was supposed to be stretching. These horses' necks were completely destroyed. There was no stretching whatsoever. All they did was let go of the reins, and the girl's pontificating about how this is stretching. It was pretty laughable. The horse never lowered behind. It was simply like, being run onto his forehand. So I thought that was rather too bad because, once again, people get the wrong idea. They listen to these people now that this idea of stretching horses is becoming a popular one. Like everything else, as soon as something becomes popular, we see a lot of experts in the field who we've never seen before. And anyway, so it's kind of a disservice to me, to the movement that we're trying to create here of bringing some sanity back into the horse business. So unfortunately, we see these people saying the words. I mean, ostensibly the words are the same that I use, and then you see their horses going, and, once again, stretching is not just letting go of the reins and letting the horse poke its nose straight out. So these are the things we have to watch for, and when we evaluate, the people we see around us, and as this style of riding and, correct riding becomes people are more interested, there's going to be a lot of people who are going to suddenly proclaim that, oh, this is what I'm doing, But once again, if the neck looks like an S and has been bent into horrible shapes and will not stretch forward and all the way down, you're not stretching, as period as that. So this is looking really nice here. Once again, it could have just a little more activity, but it's coming really nicely. This is very much well on its way to being there for you. So you've done a really good job of bringing this horse back. Hopefully she won't injure herself anymore, and you'll keep some consistency. It's always the hardest thing, once again, that's why, we're very careful with our horses about what we do with them. I can't tell you how many people I have met whose horses have been injured and over again. Then I talk to them, well, how did they get injured? And, it usually was the fault of the rider in one way or another, or not realizing the ramifications of what can happen to horses. And that can be simply having horses out in pastures with bad fencing or bad footing, turning horses out, with other horses with shoes on. I mean, I don't turn my horses ever out with other horses because I've just seen too many broken legs and seen too many horses have to be put down because of it, because one of them kicks another one on the kneecap and breaks their leg. But if they have shoes on, just remember that horses should never be out together if they have shoes on, because you are just really, you've loaded the weapons with heavy-duty bullets, so to speak, and they can really damage themselves, So all of these kind of things, a horse should never be run outside, When you see a horse running around like a lunatic in a field, you want to go out there and get it and calm it down. You want, horses' turnout time to go out there and be calm. So, for instance, when we turn horses out, we never turn them out unless we've worked them first. Then they get worked into a good calm frame, and they go out, and preferably, now it looks like you have plenty of grass where you are, so that's great. Here in California, that's one of the hardest things for us because we don't have that sort of thing. But just being careful, as I said, looking out for horse traps around your property, where horses can kill themselves. And because if there's something they can get into, they will. I grew up on a farm with 150 horses, and, it was just constantly taking care of the fences, keeping all the dangerous things out of the way. If you have an old piece of metal out in the field or a fence that's gotten broken and half torn down, you can just bet that a horse is going to go out there and get his leg into it. So we have to be so careful of all those kinds of things so that we don't end up spending all our time with our horses injured. Not that, lots of things we can't help. Some horses are just accident prone or kind that want to kick walls and things like this. But usually they grow up out of all that. So if we keep some sanity into how we handle them and where we put them in the turnouts, and all the things in stalls that can be wrong, and nails sticking out, and all these kind of things, we have to constantly be on the guard for. But that was really a good walk there. I really enjoyed that. That was getting really into a nice stretch. And I think when you get into the problems here of the trot, she said she hasn't trotted this horse much, so when she starts to trot, it's a little difficult. Well, that's very normal. If all you've done is walk a horse for 6 months, the first time you ask it to trot, it's going to go, what? You're asking me for something different. So that's very normal, not to worry about it. You just start the trot, same thing. We don't make a big deal of it. We never try to hold a horse into a frame. We get them moving, and we use that movement to bring the frame into the correct position, and try instead of trying to hold the horse in some kind of correct position, which is never possible. Just watching last year's Olympics and just watching all these mangled horses and hollow-backed horses supposedly going Grand Prix, we all have to wonder what has happened to our national and international organizations in all of the horse sports. Once you have an idea for what's going on and you see how dumbed down all this has become, um, it's just pretty appalling. And of course, very sad for the horses. And very often cases, it's not, riders want, when they're first learning this, they want to learn how to ride. They don't have ideas, but unfortunately, they go to trainers who, unfortunately, the biggest biggest delusion is thinking that because somebody has won a few horse show ribbons, or even a lot of horse show ribbons, that they have any clue about how to ride. And unfortunately, in today's world, that seems to be the only thing people value: is this person won this person won that, without looking at the fact that, what happened to the horse. We see so many of these so-called upper-level riders in America. None of them train their own horses. They buy made horses for millions of dollars that other people have trained, just for the purpose of selling to these kind of people. And then they come out, and of course, when they first come out on their $1 million horse, first year or so, they win everything until the horse starts falling apart. And then, it's very rare. I know of all the upper level riders that I know around here, I've never seen any one of them have a horse last more than 4 years, and most of them only last 2 years before they're completely shot. A really good walk here. And so remember that the biggest way to completely destroy your horse these days is to follow veterinarians' advice and do these maintenance injections on your horse, folks. Remember, maintenance injections are nothing but painkiller and fever inflammation reducer, shot directly into the joints of your horses. And every time you do that, you're just one step away from losing your horse. It is not a cure. And if a veterinarian tells you that it is, find another veterinarian, because that's just somebody making their house payment off of you and your horse. None of our horses get injected, just so you guys know that. We don't have any horse that's had any joint injections in my barn. The only one I can think of is Contigo had to have an injection in his neck when he first came years ago, because his neck was so completely inflamed between the vertebrae because he had been so completely broken over. But you should see him now, going on 25 years old. You would think he was an 8-year-old. So this is all really good what you're doing here. This is exactly what this horse ought to be doing at this level. Really good in the walk here. And when it comes to the trot work, which we'll come to here in a bit, it's just that thing of understanding that you just have to take your time with it, and it will soon get better. But we just don't stay in it. The horse can't sustain he had quite a nice trot on the lunge line. So if you can do it on the lunge line and you get up and you can't do the same thing, it usually simply means the horse isn't strong enough to carry you. Now, you're not a heavy person at all, but it certainly should show everyone, how much even a light person on the back of a horse alters the horse and makes it difficult for him. So we have to build up that strength in the horse's back. Once again, that's also what happens to so many young horses. People don't do the groundwork. They don't strengthen their backs. People want to ride horses because that's what they paid all this money for, is to get to ride. Well, it just doesn't work that way. When you do that too soon, you end up just destroying the horse. And you don't get to ride at all after you've destroyed the horse, unless you can go buy another one, which, unfortunately, so many trainers today they're always trying to convince people that the horse they have, oh, this one's just no good. And even if they picked it out for them, it's amazing. A year later, they're going, oh, this horse is no good. Well, you picked it out, so why is it no good a year later? So it must have some reflection on what you're doing. Every horse in the world can be improved, which is, I think you guys have begun to see here from the numbers of horses that we do. That, unless a horse is completely lame, there's not much, there's a lot we can do. And even a lot of horses that, with joint problems and these kind of things, this work that you're doing here will work all of that out. But it comes slowly, just like a person coming back, who's never worked out in their life, and they decide to start working out at 65 years old. Well, it's going to be a slow process. But as many of you have heard me say many times before, if you're still alive, you can improve, whether you're a horse or a human. So this is all really good in this walk, exactly what you want to have the horse doing. And once again, this isn't a horse with a big giant stride. It's fairly straight behind, so you have to optimize everything that you do with a horse like this, because otherwise he's never going to push through the back. And that's what the thing that's fooled so many people today with these really expensive horses that you see out there. I'm talking about the ones that are $100,000 up, because that's about that's about the price range of them. The ones that have that kind of capability, that have so much flexion in their hocks that even when they're upside down, they keep flexing their hocks, and that's what's confused so many people. Now, if those horses were actually trained correctly, you'd see a whole different kind of flexion in their hocks, and it would develop beautifully. But we're actually seeing a lot of articles by veterinarians and people talking about, is it the breeding horses? Why are all these horses? No one seems to understand why all these horses are getting kissing spine. They're trying to say, well, it's the breeding of the horses. Now, it's not the breeding of the horses. It's the training of the horses. It's pure and simple. Otherwise, why would they all be going lame? I mean, that's the question you have to ask yourself. A horse should be lasting for at least 20 years, if not much more than that. And of course, one of the main reasons for all of that we want it to take our time, is because you never really get the real partnership and the real joy of riding until you have developed that kind of partnership with a horse, where the horse is trusting you and it's trying for you. No horse that's ever abused will ever try to do anything. You can abuse them into doing things like scaring them over fences and things like that, where they jump because they're scared to death, which is how most horses are jumping today, which is, of course, why we have so many jumper riders being killed. So again, I remind everybody, if you force your horses to jump, someday they will jump a fence that they shouldn't jump. They will land in the middle of it and flip over on top of you. And that is exactly why all these jumper riders, we had 7 international jumper riders killed last year alone. This is why it's happening. Unfortunately, I don't see anybody in our national or international organizations talking about any of this. So when you see starting off in the trot here, as I said, you haven't been trotting this horse a great deal. What you are experiencing here is very normal. Horse is just going, oh, okay, now I'm back to this. And once again, it doesn't take you long to get the horse in a good frame like that. So that was just exactly. Now, if you hadn't gotten the horse into this decent trot here, within a few minutes, I would have just said to come back to the walk. But this is working out pretty good. So once you got it going, he's getting back into that stretch, remembering what it was he was doing on the lunge line. And there he looks quite good. Now, even just in the beginning of this, look how in this photograph, once he got into the stretch, look at the difference in the hocks, how the hocks are flexing at the back end. Always remembering that dressage is all about movement. If what you're doing is destroying the horse's movement, how could it be any good? Remember, dressage is about the perfection of 3 natural gaits. Whereas today we see in dressage horses actually being trained more like gaited horses. Once you understand that aspect, that the diagonal pairs in the trot, that is the outside hind leg with the inside foreleg and vice versa, must always swing together in all levels of collection, must come through. So when you see the front leg being thrown straight out from the shoulder, the way we see in so many of these horses, we know that we're no longer in the realm of dressage. Those horses should be getting zeros on those movements because they're not in collection. They're not even in working gaits. But unfortunately, everything, this downward spiral of the sport started in the 90s, when all of a sudden I was at shows and I heard people like arguing with judges because the judge had said some negative comment, on their test. The judge is there to tell you what's wrong, not to write a bunch of stuff saying how glowingly wonderful you are. So because the judges now got all scared to say anything, nobody says anything. The scores went into these ridiculous heights that they are now. I mean, the last Olympic Games, we saw a horse win that was completely dead lame, and in his dead lame test, it gets a 90-something%. How does a dead lame get a 90-something% in a test? Unbelievable to me. Right there. Now that's getting really nice there. And you see it starts to bounce. When he gets in that really low frame and really gets deep, watch how the back end, he starts to get a little more push up through the back. And remember, that's what collection is the degree to which we strengthen the back so that the horse, when it pushes off of those hind legs, it pushes and lifts the front end up into the air. That's what real collection is. So when you get a certain level, kind of a moderate degree of that, you have a working trot. When you get the nth degree of that, if you will, then you have collection. But it all comes from the same place. It's just developing the horse to have the strength to allow it to collect. And then when you can do that, as you guys see with Amber when she's working Legolas, there's never any pulling, and there's never any stopping and reining the horse back, and all these things that we see people trying to do today to get their horses on their hindquarters. Which is really kind of a misconception, that we want the horse to take weight. We want the horse to push more weight, not take more weight on its back end. That is, the strength of the hind legs has to push with more thrust up into the back, and that's what lifts the front, like a rocket taking off. But that cannot be hurried, nor can it be rushed or forced. It just doesn't work that way. The horse either has enough strength to collect, or it doesn't, as simple as that. And if it doesn't, it won't. So most of what we see called collection today is nothing but shortening. It's shortening the horse's stride rather than elevating the horse's stride. Remember, in real collection, what we lose in forward swing, we gain in upwards lift. But the movement is still round and up. Back to a really good walk here. So I thought that little section of trot was really good, and just about what I would expect for a horse who hadn't done a whole lot of trotting. It's always going to take a little, once you get that weight up there of the body, that changes everything for the horse a little bit. Goes, oh, and sort of stumbled around for a minute trying to figure out what to do with you. But as soon as it got into the stretch, it was, okay, now everything is working correctly. Certainly is a beautiful place you're in there, by the way. Back in the 80s, I spent quite a bit of time in Denmark buying horses for people, and always enjoyed it there. Really good what you're doing here. And so many people would look at what you're doing here and go, oh, our hands are all over the place. No, you're just learning how to follow the contact. That's what we have to do. The problem with so much training today is that trainers tell people to fix their hands in place, so how can they follow the mouth of the horse? So you have to learn to follow with these relaxed arms and relaxed fingers and this sort of thing. And ultimately, as the horse comes up, it will stabilize, and then your hands will stabilize. But if you try to stabilize your hands, before your position has, or before the horse is over the back, nothing is going to happen. You're just going to be stuck in a rigid position. We want to be loose on the back of the horse. We want to hold ourselves in a good position, but in a loose and relaxed manner without any tension, which you do quite well here. And once again, by learning to ride like this, it gives us that softness of our hands. So we're never taking back and pulling backwards against the horse's mouth. Completely unnecessary. Especially if you stick to the order that things come. Like, you have this untrained horse and suddenly you decide you're going to canter it. Can't canter over its back. It's probably going to be rather wild and lead to a lot of bad things. So if we just keep putting one foot in front of the other, so to speak, and one foot under the body and lifting the back, if you will, the horse will develop, it will become stabilized, and then your hands will be stable in front of you. So this has been a really good session on this horse. Exactly what I would expect. I think you've handled it very, very well. Every time he's had a little problem, you put him right back into the stretch. So know that all you have to do now is wait. You have this horse working over its back, so all you have to do is keep doing what you're doing and following the guidelines that I set out for you guys, which is, once again, just understanding if you bring the neck up and it destroys the movement, the horse isn't ready to come up. So all it's going to do is shorten. So when the horse gets enough strength, you'll be able to keep that same swinging walk and just simply shorten your reins a little bit, and the pole and head and neck will come up, but without changing the gait. So once you understand that, there's no point in fighting with the horse otherwise about anything else. So really good job here. I think you did a wonderful job with this horse. I look forward to seeing some other great stuff on this horse in the near future. So I really enjoyed working with you the last 2 sessions. I think you're doing a good job and have lots of potentials for this. So I think you'll have 2 more horses for us to see. So that's wonderful. I hope I see those soon. Great job here, and hopefully you can get to one of the clinics here in the not too distant future, as we'll be all over Europe next year. Not in Denmark yet, but lots of other places that aren't too far from you. So I hope I see you somewhere. Great job.